The intention of this working group is not to be a talk shop. In fact, the express intention of this group is to focus on action and not words.
Various political organizations and civil society actors have come together to form a new working group to push for greater devolution of power in the Western Cape. Joining me to discuss is one of the participants of this working group, Phil Craig. He is representing the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Phil Craig, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. It's great to be with you once again.
So, Phil, could you tell us what has sparked this coming together of various organizations? I see the DA is involved, Freedom Front Plus in terms of political parties, but a number of other kind of civil society groups as well. What has kind of galvanized everyone to come together around this issue of devolution?
Well, I think a lot of things. I think in many ways it's become the sort of the inevitable next step. I think first and foremost, I think there's perhaps not publicly, but there's a recognition that that probably isn't going to be a cuddly coalition government in 2024, and the most likely outcome is an ANC government in some form or other, and in a worst case scenario in coalition with the EFF. And if we look at the maths, we clearly not got the EFF or the ANC, one of the two has to be involved, and things are very likely going to get worse rather than better. And against that, and whilst that's not publicly recognised, I think privately it's recognised. Then I think we've also then got this scenario where the DA itself in the Western Cape has been elected both at provincial level and now at metro level, pushing devolution and a specific focus on a number of issues, including policing, and it hasn't really been able to deliver. Both Windy and Hill Lewis have requested the devolution of policing powers, and Chile and more recently Ramaphosa have been firm in saying no. So that creates a situation in the first instance. And then amongst this group of people, all of us believe in taking power away from Pretoria in one form or other and delivering it closer to the people. And I think what we agree and coming together as a group is where that ends is far less important than that we actually take the first step and we start this process and we start to knock down this door of a dominant central government that's incompetent, corrupt, and not acting in the best interests of the people. And I think that's led to an increasingly radical approach, if I can use that word. And I think, we're now starting to look at solutions that perhaps we might not have considered before. And I think amongst these groups of people, you'll see a variety of different approaches. There's some very powerful organizations in this working group, and collectively they're going to bring different things to the table. So, you have the likes of AfriForum who are very focused on self-doing or doing things for themselves. Let's call it de facto devolution. You have organizations like ourselves who are and the Freedom Front Plus and others who are strongly pushing self-determination, and we would be saying, look, hang on a second, there's a right here. We don't actually need to be asking the national government to police ourselves. We can just claim the right to self-determination, which is a constitutional principle and a foundation principle of international law, and we can acquire these powers. And then obviously you have the political powerhouse of the DA. And I think collectively that sets up for this battle between the devolutionists and the centralisers. And I think what we're seeing is a real evolution of our democracy, which has been given great urgency by the looming prospect of 2024 and perhaps a really terrible government in 2024. And I think that this working group is going to be the catalyst for that evolution. And I think it's long overdue, and I think it's a very exciting prospect. And I think we're going to establish some precedents that are going to be helpful for the people of the Western Cape, and not just the people of the Western Cape. It's important that we understand, there's application well beyond the Western Cape. If we acquire or establish a precedent that actually the people come first and the wishes of the central government come second, then that has application throughout South Africa and is to everybody's benefit.
So one of the issues that has catalyzed this discussion is safety and security. And Mayor Hill Lewis and Premier Windy have been pushing for greater control over policing functions with the LEAP program, the Law Enforcement Advancement Program. And that seems to be a leading indicator for some of these pressures for devolution to be accelerated. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, look, I think it's an obvious precedent. So, I mean, it's clearly there's a major issue with crime, so therefore there's a compelling need. There's already political momentum behind pushing policing. It's in the news and it's topical, so those logically come together. And it's an interesting one constitutionally. Although clearly I'm not a constitutional law expert, but for example, one of the things that came up in the working group, which is very interesting. We had a number of legal experts there, and one of the things that was started to debate is well, what are the constitutional implications of policing? So we clearly have the constitutional provisions that say the national government is in charge of policing, and they're the ones that Becky Chile and Cyril Ramaphosa are standing behind. But on the other hand, it was pointed out that the Constitution also demands that the national government protect in 12(1)(c) protects people from violence, and the national government is clearly failing in its constitutional things. So the national government has broken the Constitution. It's not complying with the terms of the Constitution. And then what happens in that consequence? So on the one hand, yes, we've got this. Well, who's supposed to control policing? But what happens when nobody controls policing and we have this dysfunctional police force and rampant crime? And at what point does it become an obligation on the national and the provincial government and municipal governments to step in and take control of policing, regardless of what the Constitution says, because because now they've got a constitutional obligation to defer to the national government, but they have a separate constitutional obligation to protect the people. And which one do they obey? And of course, there's a clear moral argument that says, well, you have to protect your people first and foremost. And if the national government has abdicated that responsibility, then it can't really then start hiding behind other parts of the Constitution to say you can't protect people either. So it's going to be a very, very interesting battle that's going to unfold. When we look at something like LEAP, and I think it's been a phenomenal program, but I think from an organisation such as the CIAG, one of the things that we say about LEAP is we must remember that LEAP is a sticking plaster. You end up in a scenario, and it's been incredibly successful, and we completely support it, and we think it's been a fantastic initiative. But bear in mind that people in the Western Cape are now paying, many of them, 3 times for policing. They're paying the national government for SAPS and its dysfunction. They're paying the Western Cape government for a LEAP, and then they're paying for private security again, because obviously LEAP doesn't cover the whole province. So it's fantastic that it's having these results, but it isn't the long-term solution. We need a proper policing solution that's funded from the national fiscus, so we pay once for policing as we're supposed to.
Yeah, and the maintenance of law and order is one of the core functions of the state, and you can argue that the state has abdicated that responsibility, particularly in the Western Cape. And I think the Constitution is actually fairly ambiguous. I mean, if you look at Section 206(4), it says a provincial executive is responsible for policing functions. So that explicitly states that a province can maintain policing functions. And then subsection A, vested in it by this chapter, assigned to it in terms of national legislation and allocated to it in the national policing policy. So potentially you could see, for example, these lobbying efforts translating into changes in national legislation. And, if you had post-2024, a more diffuse political landscape, putting aside the scenario that you painted earlier, you could also affect changes at the national level that would impact at the provincial level.
Sure.
All right, well, let's change tack. Where do you see this going from here, Phil? I mean, do you see this as the kind of beginning of a coalescing around a new devolution agenda for South Africa?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think I don't think it's just South Africa. I think this process of decentralization is going on throughout the world, and South Africa would be a prime candidate given its history and the problems it's experienced from dominant central governments who've always been problematic for somebody, and normally most people. I think at this point in time, it's very early days for the working group. We've only met once, and clearly we decided that our first focus was going to be on policing and the passing of the referendum bill. And at this point, we've just identified what those priorities are. There are other actions that we haven't made public yet, but clearly the group now has specific actions that it'll start to take in pursuit of those. I think we'll have to just watch as that unfolds in the coming weeks and months. But I mean, the intention of this working group is not to be a talk shop. In fact, the express intention of this group is to focus on action and not words. And I think you can expect to see some coordinated and relatively far-reaching actions that will have a positive effect on our democracy.
Phil Craig, thank you very much. Let's hand over to you, our audience. Do you think that devolution is the right strategy for the Western Cape? Can these various political actors work together to achieve that end? Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. My name is David Ansara. This is the Center for Risk Analysis. Until next time, take care.